It is good to be with you this morning. I say that most sincerely. Yesterday was a tough day. Chris and Evie got me bucked off. And then Tammy, where's Tammy? Tammy got me assaulted with a ball bat. And I still stand here before you today. So I hope that your Saturday wasn't as adventurous as mine, but that you had a good day all the same. I joke about some of the difficulties I had yesterday, and in a sense, those are both true. But we have all kinds of difficulties way more significant than that, right? Right up there top, I think there's a couple pews here. In fact, there's 3. Johnny's sitting here just 2 weeks ago, lost Donna. Just a couple weeks ago, Pauline passed away. Over here, Bob this week has passed away. And Tracy, I said on Facebook he was one of a kind. And if you had a chance to meet Bob, he truly was one of a kind. He was unique in so many ways. But there's a lot of struggles in life that are so real and so significant that they are really difficult to overcome. I mentioned some of the pinnacles, right, of death. But there's other challenges that plague us as we go throughout our life, whether it's health issues or health issues even worse yet of our children. Difficulties getting anything done. I was so excited a couple weeks ago. I bought some new equipment for our podcast. For those of you that join in for the podcast, as we've filmed out and about, there's a lot of background noise, and sometimes it gets so distracting it's hard to hear. So I got a lot of new equipment that's supposed to make the audio way better, and I just keep failing with it. In fact, we had to completely redo a podcast because the audio was so awful with the new equipment that wasn't even usable. Then yesterday's intro video, I went out Friday so I could get that on Friday afternoon, Friday evening, and Leanne and Chris and Evie helped me film it and got home, and there was no audio on it whatsoever. And I thought, is this thing ever going to take place? But that's small issues. What about the real things in our lives? I mentioned in that video some of the struggles with finances and our careers and our relationships. Have you ever felt as though you're spinning your tires in any of those areas, or worse yet, in all of those areas? Certainly 2020 provided for some of the most unique challenges that we've had in our life, and 2021 is promising much more of similar challenges. I work and I strive and I just don't get anywhere. And then some good-meaning, well-intentioned Christian says to me, don't worry, it'll be all right. God's in control. What's that mean? Does that mean that, it's tomorrow I'm going to wake up and it's all better? My bank account's not any longer. I was looking for Caden. He came to mind. My bank account's no longer a negative $300, right? It's all better. There's no more bills. My husband speaks kindly to me. My wife loves me, Mike. It's all better, right? No, it's not. We know it's not. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean God is not real, or God's not involved in my life, or maybe just where in the world is God? As I thought about some of these things, and actually I also, it's a similar topic but different material. There's a lesson by an individual entitled, "I Didn't See That Coming." How many times do we say in life, I didn't see that coming? You know, when we follow God's plan, even when God's in control and we're doing everything we're supposed to do and we think we know where God's taken us, the truth of the matter is we're going to find ourselves saying, I didn't see that coming. In fact, maybe one of the best examples of that, if you would turn your Bibles to Exodus, the 13th chapter, where Kevin read for us, in verses 17 and following. If you think about these Israelite people, and for a moment put yourself in their position. They have been in slavery for over 400 years now. And they cry out, and we read early in the book of Exodus that God, the Bible doesn't use this word, but it's my word, finally. You see, if you're the Israelites, you say, finally hears us. But what do you think God's going to send you? A mighty warrior with a big old sword, right? With a whole bunch of tanks behind him. And you get a shepherd? Are you kidding me? Didn't see that coming. Now, God sends that shepherd before Pharaoh, and he brings the greatest nation on the face of the earth to their knees begging for mercy. And they go marching out because now they're following God. And did you catch the end of what Kevin read? Verse 22. Let's come back to 21. And the Lord went before them by day in the pillar of cloud to lead them along the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, that they might travel by day and by night. The pillar of the cloud, and by day the pillar of fire by night, did not depart from before them. God is leading them. This pillar of cloud is before them in the day, and pillar of fire at night. And so they know exactly what to do, where to go. Marie, are you thankful for GPS? Does he get lost a lot less with GPS? I figure a little bit less. I won't tell you, I don't know why, Lee, but this Lee over here is smiling. I remember Dean and Eddie, you were with Gary, and we were going down to Dan's funeral. Amanda and I caught up to you guys from behind. And Gary says, I'll follow you for a while. So we're going down, and I have the coordinates locked in the GPS, and we're zooming down the road. Gary calls me and says, hey, we need to stop at the next rest area. I said, okay, so we pull in the next rest area. Gary goes to this lady behind the counter in the rest area and says, ma'am, we're going to Searcy, Arkansas. Could you tell me the best way to get there from here? True story, right? And we get back out the vehicle. He says, now I got a way to go from here. And he starts leading the way. And the GPS keeps saying, turn around, go back, turn around, go back. Troy and Amanda and I were in our vehicle, and Troy's rubbing his head. Dad, what are you doing? Finally, the phone rings, and Gary says, I'm a little turned around. And meanwhile, the little time where it's telling you when you're going to get there keeps going up and up and up and up, getting longer and longer. And finally, Gary calls, and he's like, I'm not sure. I said, oh, no, I know this area. I had GPS on. I said, follow me, and I took a left, and off we went again, right? Now, understand this. They had something better than GPS. They had the pillar of cloud by day and the fire by night. And where do they go? To a dead end. They find the Red Sea in front of them and an angry Egyptian army behind them. Didn't see that coming. And now what? I know we all gather together and cry a lot and lash out at God. Why did you bring us into the wilderness to die? Right? It's exactly what they did. But verse 17 gives us an interesting perspective because God, we'll say 30,000 feet because that's where we fly when we fly. God has a bird's eye view from 30,000 feet or even higher, doesn't he? He's got the whole picture. You see, verse 17 tells us why they're at the dead end. Verse 17 says, when Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although that way was near, the shortest way home, right? God told them where they were going. They knew how to get there, and they just wanted to take the shortest way home. He says, no, we're going this way. Why? Lest the people change their minds when they see the war and return to Egypt. There's a lot of battles to be fought when we take that shortest way home. Now let's explain this for a second. Come down just a couple more moments, or excuse me, a couple more verses here. Is it verse 19? The people went out ready for war? Yeah, verse 18, but God led the people around by the way of the wilderness towards the Red Sea. And the people of Israel went up out of the land of Egypt, equipped for battle. Isn't that interesting? God says, you're not ready for battle, but we're ready. We're ready. We'll come back to that in just a moment. God's dead end, when the shortest way home is not a straight line. I'm going to break this into 3 points today. I hope to look at God is in control. And so that we don't burn any prime ribs, next week we're going to look at the idea of why God takes us the wrong way. It's what we see happening here, right? Home's that way, Lord. Why you have me going this way? And then lastly, what to do in times of waste. I want to give you some ideas about why God takes us the wrong ways. We're not going to look at these particular ideas. God has a plan in Canaan for them. But the people leaving Egypt are just a bunch of slaves. You see, they need to go to Mount Sinai first, don't they? Because they need to become a nation. Oh, they've got their swords or whatever they took from the Egyptians. They think they're ready for battle, but they're going to get whooped. Is the truth of the matter. They aren't ready for the battle. Oh, and there's one more thing. A whole bunch of them need to die. Now let me make that real for you and I. You see, because a whole bunch of these people leaving Egypt aren't about to do what God tells them to do. In fact, they get right there to the Jordan River. And by the way, this is exactly what the song we sang just before I got started, Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah, is talking about. When God guides them right there to the Jordan and says, go in and take it, they say, no, hold on, we're going to send some spies in. We got to figure this out. And then the spies come back and they say, oh, those people are big. I'm not going in and fighting them. You know, they're looking like a whole bunch of Mikes. You know, great big bald-headed guy with a big fierce beard, right? They're saying, well, I'm not tangling with him, right? I'm going elsewhere. And so God has to lead them back into the wilderness so a whole generation dies off. Here's the point I think is relative to you and I, or applicable to you and I. Sometimes I want the blessings God promised, but there's a whole lot of me that has to die off before I can accept it. A whole lot of us would like $1 million. Very many of us would destroy our lives with $1 million. We need to learn some principles before we get there. There's a whole row, a couple rows of youngsters, and some back there and some over there. You'd all like to drive. What do you think, Colton? Dad get you a nice Ferrari? Ooh, yeah, that'd take the cake, right? he's got to learn some things first, doesn't he? Why God takes us the wrong way. And then last week, we'll look at what to do in times of waste, or what do we do when everything around our lives doesn't seem to be adding up. We just want to get there, don't we? The shortest way home is not always a straight line. That's one of the things that this passage is telling us. Now, what's really interesting is in the 19th chapter, if you're still in Exodus 13, just turn over a few pages. Because God describes these 3 months between Egypt and Sinai in this way. Chapter 19 and verse 4. You yourselves have seen that I did what I did to the Egyptians. No one can argue that point, right? Notice this next phrase that God says. And how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, I encourage you this afternoon or sometime this week to read chapters 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18. Because what you will find in those chapters is the people get real hungry and they complain. They get real thirsty and they complain. They get lost and they complain. And did you catch what I said earlier? 3 months. You see, when I think of being born on eagle's wings, when God says, here's what I'm going to do for your life, this is what I'm thinking of. Right? This is how I want to get there. I'm going to get in that plane, go to 32,000 feet, and in an hour and a half from Latrobe, I'm going to be in Florida. Right? Just so you're wondering, that's a picture somewhere in Utah from the wing. That's not Florida. But that's what I have in mind. But sometimes you end up driving home in Malibu. Notice this, because I think this is real illustrative. If you break this seat into thirds, there's something on this far left side that seems to impact the whole equation, doesn't it? And it turns out that a size 14 foot does not fit going straight forward in Malibu. It's got a twist and it's got a turn. And there was some complaining, let me tell you. From all of those seats, there was some complaining. But sometimes these inconveniences are the very best. And when we look at the difficulties in life, when we realize that we're not getting there as quickly as we wanted to get there, as quickly as we thought we wanted to, or there's a lot of luggage around, a lot of baggage, a lot of garbage in our lives that we don't want to deal with, it's important that we understand that God is still in control. And that means that He's in control in the bad times. You see, that means that even though when I left Egypt, I wanted to head northeast and get to Canaan as quick as possible, and here I am heading to the southeast, right to the Red Sea, that's going to pin me in, make me vulnerable to all my enemies, God is still in control. Really? What about Genesis 3? Remember what happens in Genesis 3? You see, everything was good. God was obviously in control. He took this uninhabitable space and time, and He makes it serve me. He makes everything beautiful for me. He gives me an earth where food pops up out of the ground. Pretty cool place. I know God's in control. But in Genesis 3, a snake comes along and says, now hold on, you don't realize it just yet, but there's a whole lot you don't have yet. And I can make that a whole lot better for you. And we see that man sins and is separated from God. And that all these things start to go awry. The earth no longer willingly just gives me food, it revolts against me. And all these other issues that go along with that curse. But yet, God was still in control. What about chapter 6? When we get to the point that our neighbors are more than just playing loud music. Our neighbors are now shooting in our direction and at us. You see, in Genesis 6, we read that the world is so evil that people think only evil continually and always. Every thought is evil. You talk about an awful place to live. God was still in control. What about Exodus 1? You see, because God deals with that problem in Genesis 6, and then he takes Noah's lineage and then Shem's lineage, and then as we're staying on Sunday nights in Genesis, the 12th chapter, we're introduced to Abram. And he takes Abram's lineage and he brings about all these good things. But then there's a famine in the land, and God says, I need to get my people to Egypt. And so they go down, and you see, they know for sure God's in control because Egyptians give them all the very best of the land and everything's wonderful. And they know God's in control. But what about Exodus, the first chapter? As we turn that Bible over from the end of Genesis, we see in Exodus 1, there arose a Pharaoh who did not know Joseph. And implied in that, it was certainly mean that he did not know God. And things weren't so good. Now, all of a sudden, these people who were getting free food off the land and had the best of everything handed to them are making bricks from straw they have to go cut. Oh. And I would happen to think quite a bit worse. Their children are being slayed and put to death. Turns out, God was in control. You see, in Genesis, the 37th chapter, there's something interesting to me. This Joseph, who had good times and bad times, and man, that guy, he's on God's path, and it's not a fun path, right? God says, I'm going to make you a king. Hey, Chris, God says, I'm going to be a king. Chris says, what? He said, yeah, you're going to bow down to me. Chris takes his club, clunks me in the head, throws me in the well, and sells me to the Chinese. Right? What? I don't like the way this is going. Right? But don't worry, God's with me, so everything goes well. And now I've got a prestigious job. I'm the head of Potiphar's house. Just there's no misunderstanding. Potiphar was not Chinese. It took some artistic licenses there. So now everything's good. But wait, I'm back in jail? Because of a false accusation? Oh, God will use me to bless the people here by interpreting dreams. That's great. But wait, they forget me when they get out and I still rot in jail? Oh, wait, now I see, Lord. Now I see. Here come my brethren, and we can make up, and we can get all the best lands that we were talking about. Now God's in control, right? At the end of the book of Genesis, Joseph says, listen, I'm about to die. I want you to keep my bones because God promised me I'm going to be in Canaan. And after I die, there's going to come a day when God's going to visit you and he's going to deliver you back to Canaan. And I want you to take my bones with you and bury me in Canaan. Now there's faith. And did you notice in the passage that Kevin read for us, is they're leaving Egypt, going the wrong way. They pack up Joseph's bones, And here they're taking them along of what eventually ends up back in Canaan. Here's all the point. Even when everything is awry in my individual life, it doesn't mean that God's not in control. It may mean that I need to learn some lessons. It may mean that I need to be a stronger person. It may mean that I'm not ready for the blessings that I think I ought to have just yet. But it does not mean that God is not in control. You see, God does not micromanage. It's probably kind of small to read that comic that's been up there, huh? It says there's no hyphen in micromanage. That's coming from the guy looking over the other's shoulder. Mom's looking confused. He's micromanaging how to spell micromanagement. Oh, okay, she got it. So there's some things in my life that maybe I'm going to bring about. That my problems in my life, some of them are my fault. Well, that doesn't mean that I'm not in God's control. It doesn't mean I'm not even a child of God. It means there's some things I need to work on. And then, when we think about Job, it may mean that there's just a bigger picture. You see, when I think about Job, Job is not the man that brings all of his problems on himself, right? He doesn't make really bad decisions that causes all of his wealth to disappear, causes all of his children to die, and causes his health to go down the drain. It's not his decisions that cause any of that. But why? Why does Job have to go through all of that? Here's what's interesting, because we ask this in our lives all the time. Why, God? Why? And it's not wrong to ask that. But here's something useful for me. Job never knew why. I can know why. I can go back and look. I can read, and I can know the conclusion. Job, to the best of our knowledge, was never told that. That means that I may not even know why I'm going through these difficult times or the benefits. But think about that. Could Job possibly have envisioned his name being on this PowerPoint screen or live streamed over the internet? As an example. You see, God's purpose for his life was way, way, way bigger than anything that he ever could have imagined. But God is in control in bad times. Stephanie, I appreciated the post that you put on the church Facebook page about our children in a time when everyone is saying, I feel so sorry for our children. Someone told me yesterday they're going to have to pay back all this debt we're acquiring. No, they're not. It's going to be their children paying it back and their children paying it back. Oh, I feel so bad. Our children have such a wrecked world to live in. Stephanie made a beautiful post, shared it, and then I shared it on my personal page. That kind of view is a view that does not see God in charge. The post goes along the lines of raise them to be what God would have them to be, because it is a time like this that will need strong Christians, and you, and me, and in our children. Esther 4:14. Oh, Esther was like Frodo, right? Frodo says to Gandalf, I wish this ring had never come to me. And Gandalf says to him, it's not for us to choose what comes to us or what times we live in, but you're the man for this job, or the hobbit for this job, right? Raise your hand if you have no idea what I'm talking about. Folks, it's about a quarter of them have no idea what Lord of the Rings is. You need to go home and watch Lord of the Rings. It's your Was your hand up too, Emily? Was your hand up too? Okay, forget that whole illustration, you quarter. The rest of you, I hope you understood. Look in Esther 4:14, where Mordecai is saying to Esther, for if you keep silent at this time. You see, Esther's saying, I don't want this obligation. I don't want to do what I have to do. I don't want to go to the king. For if you keep silent this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Mordecai says to her, no, don't you keep silent. You do what God has told you to do because this is why you were born. For such a time as this. You see, God is in control. Even in the bad times. Even when I'm hurting, even when my life is a wreck. But how do I know? And I will leave you with this point. That serpent came to Eve, right? And Mike, he says to her, now listen, I think you know you have it good, but there's things that are so much better that God doesn't want you to know about. Let me show you. This tree over here that you were told not to eat from, it tastes good, and it's going to make you really, 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 really smart. How should have Eve known not to eat of that tree? This is a sincere question because I put myself in Eve's situation. And I think the truth of it is, you would have eaten of the tree. And I would have eaten of the tree. I know that because I have in my life. I've pursued sin. I've made horrific mistakes. But I'm talking about Eve. Well, how should have she known that God was telling her the truth? Because Satan's saying to her, he doesn't have your best interest at heart. Well, let me think. He took this void and empty space, this inhabitable, inhospitable, or unhospitable area, and he made food spring up out of the ground just for me. Took care of my every need. In other words, in the past, God has been there for me. God has done all this for me. If I've trusted him with my past, can I trust him with my future? I think that's the real question you deal with and I deal with on a regular basis as Christians. What about Joseph? Joseph went through all those difficult times I've already touched on. How could he possibly known that God was going to get him out of that well? Or really, here's the bigger example. Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Daniel was willing to be eaten. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were willing to be roasted because they knew God was going to make it all right. Why? Because he had their back. I mean, in the past. And he delivered them. What about Israel? They had all these stories. Here they are in Egypt. And they cry out, and God sends a shepherd. What? I'm pretty disappointed. I'm telling you. Really? A shepherd? But then he goes down through these long list of 10 plagues. And he brings that nation to their very knees. okay, God, I'm with you now. Here we are. We're off. We're going. Wait, the Red Sea? God, where are you? You disappeared. Actually, he hadn't disappeared. He was right in front of them with the cloud and the fire, right? He had them in the past. It was the same God who brought them out of Egypt that was going to take them across the Red Sea. It was the same God that took them across the Red Sea that was going to take them across the Jordan River and into the Promised Land. You see, the way they should have known that God was in control is he had their back. If he had their back, he was going to have their future. What about you? How do you know that God has your future? Well, as a Christian, let me speak to you for just a moment. Has he had your back? Has he been there for you in your life? That doesn't mean everything's perfect, but you know God's been there leading you, providing blessings for you in your life. If he was in control in the past, he'll be in control in the future. Let me speak to you for just a moment if you're not a Christian. You say, well, I look into my past. I don't know. Quite honestly, there's a lot of people in this community, in this nation, in the world, that a lot of good things happen to them. In fact, Scripture talks about that. He says, I cause the sun to shine on the good and on the evil. I cause the rain to fall on the just and the unjust. What difference does it make? Let me tell you a little story. God took a place that was a whole lot worse than what we see right now, because you couldn't have lived in it. And he made it available and habitable for you. And then people ruin it for people, right? Our Kitco students remember Mr. Kitco talking about people ruin it for people, and we messed it all up. But guess what? Before the foundation of the world, God says these people are going to mess this up. I'm going to make some plans. And he guides and he fixes the problems all along. And eventually we get to the New Testament where God says, everything's pointed to this moment. I'm going to give my son for you. I'm going to give my Spirit available for you so you can be a better person. But you know what? It's not going to be good enough. I'm going to allow my son to die on the cross of Calvary, to shed his blood, the righteous for the unrighteous. So that your sins might be covered. You could ask a lot of things from me, and I'm probably prone to giving you some of them. But you ask me for my son or my daughters, and we're going to have a fight. You see, I serve a God that was willing to give his son for you. And so I ask what I think Romans, the 8th chapter, deals with. What wouldn't he do for you? He's had your back before you existed. He'll have your future. He's in control of the world. Is he in control of your life? If you've not submitted to that kind of God, to that kind of Savior, or if your life spiritually is floundering, you need the encouragement, the prayers of fellow Christians. Why not come forward and make that need known as together we stand and sing?